Krishna, thank you so much for the opportunity to present to the group today. We were trying to remember the last time I was here, and I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So it's great to be back to talk to this group. Let me see. Getting used to. There we go. All right. So this is a painting that was made in 2009. It's very similar, or sort of gives you an idea of the things that I'm about at this moment in time. But I'm gonna travel back in time and touch on a few important moments for me as an artist. And so something that was really important to me was, as an undergraduate, I didn't start out thinking, oh, I want to be a painter, I want to make abstract paintings. But I started with a very intense interest in working from the figure and drawing from the figure. And one of those moments in school for me, when I was at Concordia University in Nebraska, this small school in the middle of a cornfield. The sculpture professor, Donald Dennison, had us go to a nursing home that was nearby, and we did clay portraits of the residents there. And that was in my sophomore year. And as I was going into my senior year and thinking, I need to make a senior exhibit, I need to sort of get a portfolio together, I thought, oh, well, I could go to the nursing home, and there's all these people around there, and I could make drawings there. And it was a sort of flat-footed decision, sort of like something that I knew existed. I could go there, I could find people, I could draw from the figure. And what I didn't realize is sort of like how sort of intense the sort of project would become. And what I did was I got permission to visit there 3 times a week. I would strap my drawing board onto my back and have my bag of pencils and erasers, and I would hop on my bike and I would take like a 15-minute ride to the nursing home. And I would get there, and sometimes I was more of a fly on the wall. And then other times I was, sitting down, talking to the person as I was drawing. So there's lots of different interactions that I had there at the nursing home. This is a drawing of one of the residents there. So it started with my flat-footed sort of decision. I was very interested in artists like Degas and Lucian Freud and Francis Bacon. And still have this real great admiration for them, especially Degas. Love Degas. But one day as I was drawing, I was sitting on the floor. I needed to get up and stretch my legs. There was a lady there, her name was Esther, and she'd been watching me draw really intently. And Esther was in a wheelchair. I was standing up, and I just asked her if she wanted to draw because she had been watching my activity. So Esther picked up the pencil and made a drawing very similar to this. At first I was like, well, what is this? Thinking, is it supposed to be a car or something like that? And then she sort of smiled a little bit and she pointed to her face and she said, that's me. Well, she was referring to her 4 eyes, of her glasses. And then she picked up the pencil again and she made a drawing very similar to this, sort of starting with these parallel lines next to each other and then encased in this square. And again, I was like, what is this? I had been so intensely sort of trying to render the figure and get the figure down on paper. And Esther just reached to her side and she grabbed the book that was tucked in her wheelchair. She said, that's the book I'm reading. So here was a sort of pictogram, the sort of symbol for a page of text. And this is the next, well, she picked up the pencil and she started moving it a little bit faster across the page and made a drawing like this. she looked at me and she said, "That's me exercising." So this limited range of motion, but you could feel that, like, just that kinetic shift of a little bit slower pace to a little bit faster pace. And it's not like I had this experience with Esther and I ran back to my studio and threw away everything that I was working on and had a big bonfire in back of the studio. But, well, here I am, 13, 14, 15, I haven't done the exact math, and I'm still talking about that experience with Esther. Because there was this directness, this sort of poetry, this sense of humor, a weight, but also a sort of levity to these marks that Esther put down, and sort of a directness that maybe sometimes I felt that I was trying too much to force. And so Esther dumbfounded me. Whoops, I just went the wrong way. I'm not used to the clicker. So I had confusion, lots of it. I wanted to make these drawings, but there was something really profound about these drawings that Esther had made. So confusion led to more confusion, wandering led to more wandering, and trying to work through it all that time. By this time, I had moved on to graduate school. I was still trying to make these drawings at the nursing home. And I was then trying to take all these drawings that I made and bring them back into the studio and then make paintings from them. And they were just big, awful, convoluted paintings. But I think something about the simplicity of what Esther showed me, I was like, I'm just going to work in my studio for a summer, and I'm going to let a painting be about one thing or two things, and just play and experiment. So sometimes it was, again, more flat-footed decisions, but I remember being taught in my intro design class that you should never cut off the corners of a painting or a picture, or that you should never just completely frame something. So I made a painting with an orange frame around it and a pencil line incised in the corners, almost like photo corners. It was like I was playing a game of like, well, what am I not supposed to do, or what are simple things that I've been taught, and how should I react to them? I was also pulling little bits and pieces here and there from painting, from the history of art, and trying to figure out what I could make from them. So I started thinking of my paintings, my work, as more like notations, like Esther's notations, and not necessarily trying to make a sort of a grand statement with everything in it all at the same time. So something like this, a little bit, like something you might find, an aura around a saint in a Tiepolo painting or another Renaissance painting, something like that. Or maybe a clipping from a newspaper might, elicit an image or sort of a shadow of an image. Or maybe my mom asking me to make a painting with a flower in it. And I told my mom, I'm a serious artist. I can't make a painting with a flower in it. But then I was like, that's so arbitrary. That's so ridiculous to make a statement like that. And so then I got it in my head that I needed to try and find ways to make paintings that had flowers in them. Sometimes it's sneaking them in, but that was a way of sort of, we set up these sort of silly or what seemed like just sort of strange limits for ourselves. And I wanted to find ways to sort of transgress or sort of move beyond some of those limits. So moving along, this drawing here is roughly from 2003. So you saw the drawing from the nursing home that I made. I really thought of myself as a draftsman, a drawer. I thought of that as my strength. And so every time I also went into painting, I felt uncomfortable, like I was trying to sort of live up to that energy and that directness. So for the rest of graduate school, so up to 2002, I didn't let myself draw at all. If I'm going to make something, it's going to be a painting, and it's going to be marks on a painting. And that needs to be where my drawing process is. But a little bit after graduating, my wife and I, we moved to New York, and I didn't have a studio. I didn't have community around me of my peers in graduate school. But I did have a lot of paper that I'd been saving up because I'm a collector of things. And I did have my kitchen table. And so I just started making lots and lots of drawings and collages and making them fast. I'd sit down and like in a night, maybe I'd make 50 or 100 drawings, wanting them to be sort of quick things happening really fast. So, you know, something like a bit of like scrapbook page paper. This is the remnant from a sheet of stickers. And then this is just ink drawing on there, you know, sort of trying to elicit or make it seem like a sort of architectural drawing of a room, but, you know, it's sort of quickly done. And, you know, sticker sheet, the remnants there. So I wanted these things to be fast, but that if you were walking along the city streets, you see lots of garbage on the city streets, but that you would see these things and or that you'd see them laying on a table and you'd almost feel compelled that you needed to pick them up and hold on to them and take care of them because there's a sense of design to them or intention. And it's like if you just had the secret decoder ring, you would know what they were for, what they were about. So I wanted them to have a sense of sort of mystique or a mysterious quality to them. And again, it's sort of everyday paper. This is like cardstock with a little gouache painting, drawing on it. Remnants of paper. And then sometimes I would then combine them and sort of put a sort of host of drawings together. And it was really, I made all these things. I wanted to show them to people, but I didn't know what was the best way to show them to people. So I started doing these things where I would just make a sort of cloud of drawings. So they'd all be tacked up, you know, so this is like Sharpie on a cut t-shirt or electrical tape on a end of a watercolor block, you know, graphite on typing paper, you know, all sorts of different things, and book cloth with some collage on it. So these different sort of everyday materials, things that are around that might sort of float through your hands and can be very incidental and thrown away, but also maybe have a sort of quality to them that you might want to hold on to them, mysteries, if you will. At the same time, I've got a studio. This painting's from 2007. It's actually pretty soon after I started at the University of Tennessee in 2005. So I started making paintings like these. While I was in New York, I got a studio while I was there and would, you know, make paintings that sort of inquired along these lines. What I figured out was that, so there's the marks that Esther made. There was these notational drawings that I made, these sort of incidental things. And I figured out that what I was interested in as an artist was not, you know, setting up my easel and painting the landscape or working from the figure. But the thing that was really intriguing to me was the things that we have around us as human beings. So whether it was, you know, the design of this chair, this building, that magazine there, all those things that are around us, you know, they all have this sort of intention and design to them in a sort of way that they want to communicate with us. And sometimes these things communicate very effectively. Sometimes they communicate what they are not intended to communicate. Sometimes, you know, architecture can become really oppressive when that's not the architect's, you know, intention. Or many times in class when I'm talking to students, their intentions in a painting or a work of art are not what the viewers begin to see. but there's always this sort of attention or sort of longing that we place within images. And this is a more concrete example, but we run into that so many times a day. When I open up my computer, when I click on my internet, my email account, Facebook, when I go on Amazon and I want to buy, a book, or I go to wherever and I want to buy a pair of shoes. It's our way of sort of connecting and saying, well, this is what I want, or I desire, or I want to connect to this person. And it sort of is a way that our hand works in that virtual realm to try and connect us to the rest of the world, to try and communicate, to express longings, whether it's just like a silly thing, like I need a new pair of sneakers, or like trying to find somebody who you've lost touch of for 25 years. Okay. But what I did figure out was that it is those things in the world that we mark and make. So whether it's like a really bad asphalt repair job, there's a sort of like history there that like, okay, this material is messy, we need to cover this up, but we also need to get out of the way of traffic. And so there's that sort of speed and, like quickness about it. Or things like cut gemstones, sort of, cutting that so that we can look at the beauty that's sort of in the rough, and then polish it and make it shine. And so these things that are sort of all around us. What I also wanted to do and sort of started to develop in my work is that I didn't want to necessarily do a show where it was like all paintings, say, based off of like something like a cut gemstone, but that there would be things like the cursor that would exist next to an image based off the cut gemstone. That the paintings wouldn't necessarily, and the danger was this is, a show of my paintings might look like a group show, but that I wanted it to sort of express these different sort of modes and images that we encounter in the world each day. So there was a gallery here in town for a while called the Art Gallery of Knoxville. I did a show there, and I was really happy with it. A painting based on more sort of an abstraction, something with a plant form, something with a diamond or emerald cut form in it as well. Gold spray paint, little minuscule painting in the corner. And I wanted that sort of breadth of experience and marks in my own work. So what I thought of is these different, whether it's the architecture, graphic design, the quilt that my grandmother made. These are all, in my mind, I started thinking of them of the handwriting of humankind. And whether it's scientific imagery or whatever, this was all, it was the marks and the images and objects that other people made that I wanted to use as a jumping off point to start with in my work. These are some examples of just some small drawings or works on paper that I made while I was in residence in Ireland. So there's this artist, a German artist who I really admire, sort of crazy man artist, and there's this saying attributed to him, it's first thought, best thought. His name is Martin Kippenberger, and I really like that idea that if you sort of have this idea, that you should sort of run with it. And too often we're busy telling ourselves, well, it's not a good idea. You're a serious artist, you shouldn't make a painting of flowers, or you can't do something with Mickey Mouse ears, or whatever it is. Well, yes, you can do those things, but there's a sort of challenge there. How can you reinvent it? How can you reinterpret it? How can you make it something new and different? So it's not about what you can't do, but it's about how you hold, touch, manipulate, and sort of have that thing exist in the world. So these are just a few shots from the process room at the Irish Museum of Modern Art. And on another one of my sort of flat-footed decisions, They called it the process room. You're an artist in residence there. They wanted you to display, show some of the work that you'd been working on. And I thought, well, this is great. You know, it's a process room. I want to like work with the spirit of that. I want to show off the, you know, this folder of different images that I brought, my sort of inspiration folder, little sketches, different things that I had made. And so they found this beautiful table for me, and it had a sort of cloth surface to it. And I was like, well, I'll just spread it all out. And I just put it all out on all the stuff out on the table, and it looked like I had literally sort of just visually vomited on the table, because it was just it was a mess. It was like, you know, you'd walk into a teenage boy's like room, and like on his desk it was just covered with torn magazines and posters and odds and ends, you know, like it should all just go into a trash bag. But what I did is I started pulling things away from it and started stacking things and arranging them and looking for connections amongst these different things, whether it was a form or a feeling to the drawing or sketch that I had made, or if it was something about the object I had found. So, you know, ideas for paintings that I should make, or a Google image search for the term sublime and what came up. So these were very like everyday, just sort of things that were around, you know, me cleaning off my brush, but then there's this weird ghost mark that comes up. So there's all these different things that I was just sort of laying, wanting them to sort of exist on the table. And I knew, I was like, well, this, you know, it's everyday material, it's on this table, and it's gonna just seem strange and weird, but I really wanted to go with it. But I really got into this idea of moving things around and displaying them. I was like, oh, it's like I'm tending garden or arranging flowers. And so they opened up the gallery, people could come in. I came back after a day and, excuse me, and things were all moved around and messed with and been picked up. And I was like, I just spent a week like, you know, curating this thing. So each day I had to come in and like subtly like adjust things and put them back the way that I wanted them. But the sort of chaos that came in, it was like, it was that tabletop, you know, it's like where we sit down, we have our lunch, we, you know, work out a contract, we, you know, it's this place of possibilities and work and interaction. And here I was putting everyday things on it. And so it just like invited that chaos or possibility of life. So that was the conundrum I was left with. And then it was time to come back. And so I'm back in Knoxville, back in my studio, and was really anxious to start making some paintings again. I'd been working on paper while I was in Ireland. And this is the painting that's the Knoxville Museum of Art owns, a type of magic. So this is this work that I started making as I came back. Just a little bit about this. This was a real pain to make this painting because I kept having ideas of where I thought it should go. And it's a square, and it kept getting rotated around. Like this used to be the bottom, that used to be the top, you know, and it kept sort of turning around and round. At one point, in a moment of just sheer exasperation, I took some gold spray paint. In exasperation, if you take gold spray paint, it's usually not going to turn out well, which I should have known. But I just sprayed the words magic across the top, and hoping that magic would just sort of save the painting. Of course, it didn't save the painting, but it gave me a really messed up painting that I needed to find a way to sort of tend and care for. And the sort of tending and care for came through overlaying the sort of architectural form over the top of it, and then using these two arrows, almost thinking of, you know, it's not the same, but it provides a tension like Michelangelo's God and Adam sort of reaching and touching for each other. That sort of tension right there in the belly button of the painting. All right, so my cursor pops up again. I make lots of paintings, and I work on a lot of paintings at the same time. This is another table that I did at the Crest Gallery at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga. But this one, so this is the second table that I did, and I figured out that I put too much on it. It's like a jam-packed city block, just too much stuff laying on the table. So with this, I figured out I needed to give the things more space. But the same way that somebody like Richard Tuttle talks about the sort of electricity of things, I wanted the gravity of a piece of paper lying on top of another piece of paper to really be sort of foregrounded there, that each object and its materiality would sort of awaken through that sort of arrangement. Maybe hoping for another type of magic as well. Painting like this. I really love titles and have a lot of fun with them. The tendency of somebody's working, especially with more abstract imagery, is to sort of either to provide something that alludes to something or make it untitled or numbered. But the same way that my mom asked me for that flower painting, I thought it was completely ridiculous that one could entitle a painting All of My Love. Like, it seemed really sentimental or sort of over the top. But I really also like the idea of Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin belting out the lyric, All of My Love, over and over again. And especially with this sort of constructivist or really sort of formal looking abstraction. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, you're like, do you think about that red circle as a heart or something? Or is it like a big clown nose on the painting, or what does it add up to? So in this way, like a title like this, I think it sort of complicates the image, which the image tries to be the sort of really assertive thing, but then the title is more the sort of signing off on a letter. Some other things that I feel myself influenced by amongst all this handwriting of humankind. I think, things like children's toys and manipulatives, tangrams, stacking blocks, things like that. And these sort of different sort of images that you just sort of find around, like something torn out of a magazine or a newspaper, that becomes sort of divorced from the story that they're connected with, and become a little bit more mysterious through that. A couple years ago, there was a book that I was reading, Dave Hickey's Air Guitar, which is his essays on art, life, and culture. And in it, he has an essay about Chet Baker, and he's talking about, musicians, and, well, I'll try and get this quote for you, but I'll try not to ham-fist it too much. Dave Hickey says, having written a few songs myself, I know what singers like Patsy Cline, Judy Garland, and Karen Carpenter know most profoundly, is that all songs are sad songs, born as they are on our own insubstantial breath. And I just had to set down the book. It's like, whoa, Dave, usually you're just throwing out grenades there to sort of incite the art masses. But there's something really touching about that, and it's the fact that no matter what the object is, there's a bit of sadness to that, because, as in art, when you've got a chair sitting in a photograph and it's empty, well, that talks about presence, but it also talks about absence. And when you see a portrait of someone, it tells you about their presence, but also the possibility of their absence as well. And for me, all these marks that we make as humans, it says, you think of graffiti, it's like, I was here. I marked this space. Even if I don't own this space, I marked it, I got my name out. And it's trying to grasp onto something, to get a message out, even if you don't agree with that message or you don't want it spray painted on your wall. But it's sort of a grasping for something. And whether it's wallpaper on our walls at home or whatever, we're trying to amend, to change, to transform that environment. So this is my greatest exhibition that no one ever saw. I was invited to Columbus State University in Georgia, and people did see it, but and it was supposed to be a two-person show. They've got this beautiful gallery, and like a month before the show opened, Hannah Israel called me up, the curator, and she said, well, the other person backed out of the show, so the gallery is all yours. So I brought together like 5 years of painting, and I did 3 table installations and a bunch of other things within the space. But it was all of a sudden this great opportunity to play with space and the tables, to let them breathe, to let them exist next to the paintings, and to let paintings from different years, say 2003 and 2008, exist right next to each other. So what came as like a big oh no became a really great gift to be able to do this. So, and it's, call me a romantic, but I'm like trying to get the sort of energy, not in a weird sort of like new age way, but a sort of energy or connection or poetry amongst the parts, whether it's in a painting or whether it's on these tabletops. They both things, whether it's a painting or the tabletops, well, they're desktops. And so much, again, computers, you click on that window and you drag it over. A desktop, moving things around on it, whether it's virtual or real. And so that sort of frontal space really is important in the paintings. Again, I mentioned the sort of manipulatives, children's games or blocks, tangrams. I was really thinking about, this is a 7 foot by 5 foot painting, and it's a painting. It looks like it should be like a silk screen or something like that, but it's basically the same form repeated as orange, as red, and as green. And then that creates your sort of black there in the middle because of the transparency. But I was starting to think about these things that have a real strong sort of optical hit to them, or a pop, especially things like op art. And I'd always been really suspicious of op art because like it does that thing, it's really like, your eyes hurt, or like, the colors dance, or you see ghost images. And so it really seduces you or aggravates you based off of this sort of bodily reaction to it. But the sort of question like, well, what's beyond that? But it's sort of, I started thinking about, well, yeah, I'm an artist, that's part of my language. There's a sort of seduction or engagement through the senses, which is where the conversation really starts. And I think for me, coming to that realization sort of maybe liberated some use of color and allowed me to sort of even sort of that first thought, best thought, sort of dive in to some more sort of visual sort of pyrotechnics. It's sort of hard to see on this, but like a painting like this, you start to get ghost images in all these elbows where the grid meets. And there's this also ghost sort of image of the grid that's behind it that pops through. So there's things there that appear on the painting that aren't actually there. It's a really loud painting. And another thing that's really important to me, so you've got a 7 foot by 5 foot painting, so you stand in front of it and you're really sort of encapsulated by, it's like it's hugging you or wrapping its arms around you. But then you have a small 16 by 12 inch painting and it's a different relationship. It's more like a sort of reading space or more intimate space that you can be drawn into. This is me, thinking of plant drawings like Audubon and his animal and wildlife drawings, but also Paul Klee and Ellsworth Kelly and illuminated manuscripts, and trying to fuse and bring those different forms and lines and edges together. But then sometimes maybe it's not, Audubon and a lithograph or reproduction, but maybe it's something more like a cathedral in a sort of larger, grander space that sort of echoes with time. This is a table that I did where it was a 3-person show, and so I invited the other 2 artists in the show to provide things for it. So there's a rock that the German artist Britta, who was part of the show, provided that had a little orange indentation painted in it. Part of a pipe organ that the sculptor Mark Holmes provided for the show, and just these different things, sort of arranging them on the top of the table. And this is part of a show in San Francisco. And the title of it's Shadows of Friction. And one thing I've been thinking a lot, just in terms of art, is sometimes I think we mistake art in that we talk maybe directly about communication too quickly. And the thing for me that's highly effective, evocative about art is the friction that exists in it, that the not knowing, the moment where the language escapes us and we don't know what to talk about or what to say about it. Maybe at some point we find the words, but that friction that exists in a work of art, and friction starts fires, or it illuminates. And I think, like in poetry, when you have double, triple meanings, the sort of evocative sort of language, that's the thing that art does as well. And for me, it's within painting and making these tables that I'm looking for things that you associate, you have empathy for, that you can relate to. Granted, there's oftentimes asking a lot of the audience, but part of the process is that the audience, that we start asking questions of the pieces themselves, and what's sort of part and parcel to them. Does it look like it's cut up? Does it look like it's edited out? Why would that artist use such loud colors? These are all things that these objects of art, whether mine or another artist, begged to be asked. This is a painting titled Als ik kan. It's a Dutch phrase, or it's also very similar in German. But Van Eyck, the painter, he would write that or inscribe that on his paintings. And also George Stickley, the furniture maker, would put that on his paintings, or on his furniture, sorry. And the phrase translates as I can, or as best as I can, or as well as I can. People like to argue about its exact translation. But I thought it was a sort of strange phrase because it sounds humble, but then sort of in the 21st century, sometimes somebody says that, it's like, well, are they really being humble, or are they full of themselves? What's the situation? And I think it's something like this, or the diamond images, where there's things that exist in a sort of gray area that lure me in, and then I want to try and make something in reaction to it, and not knowing what's going to be the result. So I'm saying as best as I can, or as well as I can, but also I'm also sort of hiding it, or providing a sort of friction by making it this really geometric typeface and sort of hiding it amongst this sort of color. It's my Johnny Cash painting. I've got a good Johnny Cash quote. I love Johnny Cash. Sorry. And sometimes, and I don't usually say this often, but I sort of allow myself little jokes at some point. I love Agnes Martin's paintings, but for me, this painting became it's like Agnes Martin's medicine cabinet. That, it's like this little box or space, and you would just imagine her little thing of Tylenol in there. But it sort of has this sort of quiet quality to it in terms of its forms, but then also these sort of louder colors that exist in it. So things that just happen around the studio and maybe sort of spark an idea for a painting or a tabletop. And then this is some of the images of my recent show, work that was included in my recent show in New York. So there's Alz-Ik Khan back again. Shot of my studio. So I'm working on all these paintings at the same time. There's our baby carrier. And then just lots of different source images that I have around. This one, I need to change the title. I thought this was the title for it, and then afterwards I changed the title, and it's now The Shades is the title of this painting. Again, so this is a little sort of medium-sized painting, and then you go to this much smaller space. I was reading this book by Kathleen Norris, who's a poet, but she's spent a lot of time at monastic communities, I guess Benedictine communities, and she kept talking about the sayings of the Desert Fathers and the sayings of the Desert Mothers, and I really like this idea of that some things sort of emerging from the wilderness. So I wanted to make a Desert Father and a Desert Mother painting, sort of emerging, not being like maybe some other things around them. And so sometimes what becomes a sort of abstract painting starts with a really sort of concrete thing. And so with the title, I sort of hearken back to that. Started from a really bad set painting of a hearth, fireplace, and then became this sort of other thing, but then sort of bringing it back through the title. I think something that I often try to do is I paint myself into a corner that I will sort of, again, the sort of first thought, best thought, sort of run after something and not know how to refine it or solve it. And part of that not knowing helps me take some leaps of, just sort of these leaps in the painting and come to sort of unexpected resolution. So this is my Johnny Cash quote. I'll read it. I know you guys can read, but I'll read it too. I love songs about horses, railroads, land, Judgment Day, family, hard times, whiskey, courtship, adultery, separation, murder, war, prison, rambling, damnation, home, salvation, death, pride, humor, piety, rebellion, patriotism, larceny, determination, tragedy, rowdiness, heartbreak, and love, and mother, and God. And I read this quote and I was like, oh, they made this up, you know, this is just to like sell another album. But then I found it's an actual Johnny Cash quote. And what I loved about it is, well, that is a very big umbrella of things that one could like. But it's sort of this wealth of human experience. And it's Shakespearean in that regards, that so often maybe artists are encouraged to say, you know, like, what's the sound bite? What is, you know, what's your work about? And maybe the sound bite should be that it is about this human experience, that it is sort of making things that empathize with tragedy some days, with salvation on other days, with adultery on other days, and big and little questions, and that there's an importance to all of these. And that, Johnny Cash taught me a lot from that. Sort of the same way that Dave Hickey and this sort of just barely there breath of these songs, that sort of sense of sort of humanity in the world, and the sort of actions and gestures we make and the sort of remnants of that. So thank you very much.